Hello everybody, and welcome back to yet another addition to my journey through One Piece. One of the final editions, at least before being properly caught up. Actually, really, the final edition, because at the moment, I am caught up. I guess I'm gonna do an Egghead video, but this is the final edition, technically, of my journey before being caught up. But I am caught up. You know what I mean. Just want to apologize really quickly for how long this took to come out. It was a mix of a bunch of things, playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which took up a lot of my time, working on the video for it. I'm going to have a multi-hour length video for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and that's been consuming my life for the past few months, and I prioritize that. Also, just a bit of burnout management with regards to these videos specifically, but I'm feeling good and ready to go. I haven't finished my work on the Rebirth video, but progress is smooth and we're getting stuff done, and I feel happy to get back to recording a One Piece video, and this one will be for Wano Part 3. This is for the Wano finale. Before getting into anything, of course, we will have the AJPiece comments, but I just want to stress that this is my favorite arc in the series. I would never say that it doesn't have problems. I think it does have problems, and I mentioned them before, and I'll mention them again. I'll touch on them again here. Maybe I could just really briefly touch on them. There are some, I guess, a little bit of fake-out death with regards to specifically some things to do with Kinemon that's a little bit cheap. I do think there's some thematic undercutting with regards to Tama and speed, and there are some moments throughout Wano where the pacing could definitely be tighter. It's a little bit bloated, sometimes it's a little bit uneven. However, that's about it, really. Maybe there's one or two things I'm forgetting, but by and large, I have nothing but immense praise for Wano. I think that it has the best cast of any arc, secondary and primary cast. I think it has the best payoff for thematics. I think Wano is essentially, I think it's been essentially built up through the entire series, specifically from Skypiea, because Wano and Skypiea make each other better substantially. It feels like Wano is the spiritual successor for the spirit and themes of Skypiea, and we'll get into that. But my main thing is that I feel like Oda's been preparing for this arc since latest Skypiea, but probably since Chapter 1. And the payoff is insane here. It's absolutely unbelievable, and it's a celebration of hope and dreams and freedom and Luffy and all that he represents, and people like Odin and Roger and Nika, Joy Boy, represent. The material here had the best stuff in the series. I think G5 is my peak for One Piece. I know it's kind of controversial. I can't for the life of me understand why, or rather, I can understand, but I just don't relate so strongly that I feel like I can't understand it. But I can't understand it. I can't understand it, but I just don't agree in any sense. G5 is everything that's beautiful about One Piece, sort of distilled into this moment of payoff that is definitely not unpredictable. Like, this is something I've been seeing coming for ages, and I'm sure a lot of you guys did, but that doesn't mean that it's any less powerful. And then a lot of the character conclusions, we have Kanjiro's conclusion, we have Orochi, we have a lot of the side cast, Kaido, Big Mom, the roles played by the Supernova, Luffy, like I said, Momo, Yamato, just incredible stuff, top to bottom, and some of the best arts. There's just so much here. And just to be clear, with regards to videos going forward, I imagine I'll probably do something on Egghead. Maybe we'll do another video like this for Egghead. And one last thing, sorry for the long intro, before AJPiece comments, is that I'm going to talk about Kaido a lot, obviously. However, I'm going to refrain from digging as deep into his character psychology and role as I would otherwise, because, in the ensuing time, I've put out a video on Kaido, a video analysis on Kaido. I think it's very good, I'm quite proud of it. I think that Kaido is, full stop, the most underrated character in One Piece, and I made that video to sort of shine a light on what he represents for the series, and who he is in his psychology, and the sort of breadcrumb subtextual structure of his presentation, and just sort of spread some love for him. So I said before that I wouldn't make any videos on One Piece, that video analyses, video essays. I've been making these for years now, but I did. There's this Kaido one. So I won't go as deep into his psychology as I would normally, because I did it there. So I'd refer you out to there if you haven't seen it already. It's a good video. I'm very proud of it. It's got great editing from Fiji or Radman as well. So yeah, I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't already. But of course, I'll gush about Kaido. With all that said, let's get into the AJPiece comments for this video, and they were submitted for the first Wano video. The first one is from Tropper, who says, "I'm glad you're liking Kid. What fascinates me about him is the way he and Law relate to Luffy as heads of the worst generation. Law and Luffy share the will of D, giving them this almost cosmic luck to be at the right place at the right time. However, Law lacks Luffy's conqueror's haki, represented in the way he is hesitant to take risks and lives his life in service of others, his crew, Corazon, etc. On the other hand, Luffy and Kid share a conqueror's ambition, both throwing themselves at enemies well above their pay grade, but Kid lacks that will of D luck. As a result, he's never in the right place or with the right people, resulting in betrayal and defeat. However, true to his devil fruit, he's scrappy and continues to push ahead. Hopefully, just as Luffy helped Law to find his ambition, he will be able to put fate on Kid's side." Yeah, I really like this because, honestly, I feel like Kid, he gets a bit of a bad rep. I think he's a bit unfairly treated. I know a lot of people clown on him, and a lot of times that's just kind of fun, and that's fine. But I think that there's a really good character there. I talked a lot about him in the last video, so I won't repeat myself, but throughout Wano, he has a really interesting underlying arc and relationship with the sort of hope that Luffy represents. He sort of starts out very menacing and presented in almost an evil way. But this sort of underlying arc throughout post-time skip, and specifically Wano, gets him to seemingly start believing in what Luffy represents, and I think changing the course and complexion of the way he views the world, while also just bouncing off the other supernovae really well, and all the stuff you say here. His ambition, contrasted by his lack of the will of D, luck, as you put it. I think he's just all around a great, really interesting sort of side character that contributes substantially to my enjoyment, and I've just been pleasantly surprised with how good he's been in Wano. So I just generally like this comment, but I also wanted to draw attention to Kid because I think he deserves it. And I'm talking purely about the writing and presentation of his character narratively, not anything to do with power scaling. Gio says, "I love how you can see Oda's passion and adoration to make an island based on his homeland of Japan. Everything from the aesthetics to the clothing, culture, and power structure, you can tell he really wanted to express his love for his home country. It's a small detail, but I love that the real-life land of the rising sun ends up inspiring the land where we witness both Momonosuke and Luffy bring the dawn of the world." I totally agree, and I think I've been talking throughout my streams and throughout these videos about how Wano in a lot of ways seems to represent longing, yearning, sentiment, nostalgia, and home. And I think it's so appropriate that it is modeled after Oda's home. I don't think that's a coincidence. It's imbued in every panel, every chapter, this yearning for home that's lost by the citizens of Wano. And I think Oda's able to tap into that really special emotion because of what he imprints upon the setting and what it means for him, and what it represents. So yeah, we've talked about the variability of One Piece islands and the different settings that we see within the grander setting. And Wano just has felt a little bit special. It feels a little bit more distinguished. It feels a little bit more spiritual. And I think that could be a big reason as to why. Nerd Corner says, a very sweet comment. "I've been listening to your VODs on and off since Whole Cake, and I have to give you many props. Many other manga reviewers in general are quick to jump to conclusions that are completely different than the author's style, or what the author was setting up. But you seem to have a really good reading comprehension and finger on the pulse of what Oda's going for. Even small moments when you say, 'I don't think I'm supposed to know what this is hinting at yet,' and with me caught up in knowing the answer that you are completely correct, while other creators are quick to start shooting in the dark. I didn't watch your Naruto VODs, but your Bleach ones so far have been the same way, so it seems like it's not just Oda, but you have a good understanding of what exactly a story is trying to say. Keep it up." I just wanted to say, to include this because it's very sweet, and I think it's important to not judge a story for what it isn't or what you want it to be, but rather for what the artists and creators and writers behind these stories want to tell. What is the story that it wants to tell? You evaluate it on its own merits and based on its own intent. Before properly evaluating a story, you have to see what it's going for, to see whether it passes or fails, or how well it does, or how poorly it does. I'm not gonna judge Wano for not being this deconstruction of shonen, or something, because it's not. It's not trying to be. I'm going to judge Wano on how well it presents this beautiful tale of sentiment and longing and freedom and dreams, how well it pays off the things that have been built up throughout the whole story, how well it presents characters like Kaido and Luffy and how they bounce off one another, all the things that are so clearly the intent, rather than trying to judge it for what it's not, or really impose my views of what a story should be onto it, or a theory craft for something that clearly isn't going to happen, but that I want to happen, and then insult a story when it doesn't. Like, I think that's stupid. I want to enjoy any story I experience as much as possible because I like enjoying things. And I think that's achieved by doing the writers the utmost respect, and trying to do your best to pick up what they're putting down, and trying to see what their intent is, and trying to respect that. So yeah, I just think that's the best way for me personally to approach storytelling in my streams and my videos and stuff like that. And I really appreciate others appreciating that. So thank you so much, Nerd Corner, for saying that, because it was very sweet, and it's great to know when others appreciate that as well. It's not necessary, but it's a hell of a bonus whenever I see comments like this. The last one for today is from Time Lord. There's something I love about One Piece that I think the last few arcs, and eventually Wano, specifically highlight. Oda does a really good job of tying arcs together thematically, by having themes that blend into or morph into one another. A good example is Water 7, Enies Lobby, Skypiea into Water 7, Enies Lobby. Skypiea is an affirmation of who Luffy is, an island of dreams for pirates, whereas Enies Lobby, 2 arcs later, is the island where dreams are crushed. Specifically Luffy's dream, but more importantly, Robin's. It's an abject denial of dreams, the ultimate symbol of the world government's control, hence D. Enies Lobby, denies dreams. That's really cool. Now cut to the future. In the post-time skip, we have the arc of Dressrosa, centered around the themes of nature versus nurture and exploring the interesting dynamics of the Doflamingo family. Then post-Dressrosa, Oda morphs the idea of nature-nurture and the idea of family into the main core theme of family present in Whole Cake Island, need a breath, and how family is explored in many different facets, from toxic families like the Germa and Charlotte family to neutral and good families like Bej's Mafia and the Straw Hat Pirates. But then Oda uses Katakuri to morph the idea of family into what it means to be a big brother, and Luffy learns what it means from him. Finally, once Wano starts, that idea of being a big brother developed just an arc or two prior becomes centric, as Luffy meets Tama and starts his journey to learning to be a big brother himself by filling in the shoes of Ace. It's something that's not talked about often, but I love how beautifully some arcs transition into future ones just through the regression of the main themes of the story. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that because it's very beautifully put, and it's very true, and there's a lot of thematic coalescing. It's just, I'd like to draw attention to the integration and sort of synergy of how Oda does that, because Oda's been doing that forever, in terms of themes, but also something that I've talked about a lot, which is in terms of plot. Oda introduces threads 2 or 3 or more arcs early to have multiple things going on, so that when we do get to certain arcs, they're foreshadowed well in advance. So for example, we knew about Fishman Island and were intending to go there for ages before we actually went there. If there is an Elbaf arc in the future, that's been foreshadowed forever. Alabasta was set up so well in advance, multiple arcs in advance. Robin's backstory and all that happens in Enies Lobby was set up plot-wise with her earlier stuff. So my point is that One Piece throughout, you could be experiencing an arc, and then towards the end of an arc, you get a little bit of a thread, a little bit of a character introduction, or an introduction of a plot element that hints at an arc that will come down the line 2, 3, 4, 5 arcs in the future. And that's something I've talked about a lot, and that's something that Oda's been doing forever, to make this feel like, well, firstly, a well-planned out story, but also a world that is intermingling and with so many parallel things happening at once, and that when the crew get there, it's not that this land comes to life because they're there. It's a place that existed prior to when they arrived and will exist after they leave. Now, my point is that this directly correlates with what you're talking about themes. Oda introduces thematics and then builds upon them in all the ways you said. The same way that he does with the plot and the arcs. And he also does this in a really interesting way thematically with the thematic tandem he does with Wano and Egghead. Now, I won't talk about Egghead here, but just to hint at it, I feel like Wano introduces a theme and an idea, or multiple, and Egghead offers a counterpoint to that. It is a sort of thematic rebuttal. It sort of examines previously presented themes and ideas and expands upon them and questions them and offers a new complexion to them. So, Oda's been doing it from the start, and he continues to do it even now. And there's something beautiful about the fact that, as much as One Piece has expanded and changed, and, Oda himself has changed in writing and presentation in a lot of ways, but some things are just so core to who he is and how he writes and tells stories that just don't change. And the thematic integration, the thematic foreshadowing, the plot integration, the goofiness, the silliness, the heart, the themes, the payoffs, a lot of that just doesn't change at all. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Anyways, thank you for your questions and the AJPiece comments. That is the end for the AJPiece comments for this video. Now, you can continue to give AJPiece comments, and I may read them in future videos. The future of these videos is a little bit up in the air. Like I said, I'll probably do something on Egghead, probably, but, I can't pump these out every few weeks anymore because I'm caught up, so there's not going to be arcs every few weeks. So you can put the AJPiece comments, and who knows, maybe I'll read them in a future video or do something with them, but no guarantee anymore. Now that we've gotten to the point where the next video is Egghead, I'm going to be reading the AJPiece comments for 102. This is 103. I don't know what's exactly going to happen with that, but feel free to share them anyway. It does make it more likely that I'll read them. I do read basically every comment, but it makes them stand out a bit more, so feel free to include the AJPiece hashtag as long as you're okay with them not necessarily being used in the future, because it's a bit up in the air. And with regards to future content and videos on this, I won't be doing chapter reviews. I will not. I've been saying for years that I won't be making any One Piece video essays, but I just made one. So I can't necessarily say I won't do any in the future. What I will say is that I don't intend to, but fair enough if you just don't take me at my word after I lied about that in the past. But I promise I'm telling the truth right now. I don't have any intent for any One Piece videos right now. That doesn't mean it's impossible, though. And yeah, for future chapters, I won't be doing chapter reviews on YouTube. I'll be doing them every week on Twitch, or every week that Oda releases a chapter on Twitch. And I may be able to put them on YouTube. We'll see how that goes. Either way, they'll be on Patreon as well. And I'll continue to do sort of arc discussions and character spotlights and maybe arc spotlight, or I want to do a reread of Skypiea. All those plans going forward. There's going to be tons of One Piece content. Won't be slowing down at all just because I've caught up. So yeah, those are the plans going forward. Back to the subject at hand, let's talk about Wano. Where we last left off, we had this beautiful, beautiful scene where Kaido defeats Luffy and talks about the sort of futility, the emotional wanderlust he feels, his allusions to Joy Boy, and all that, and it's one of the best scenes in Wano, and so revelatory for his role and his psychology and his character. And again, I talk about that a lot in my video on him, as well as the part 2 of Wano. Meanwhile, Momo reads Oden's book, seeing the importance of that, and it's a very emotional, sort of meaningful moment for Momo specifically. Chopper continues his fight with Queen, and then we see that Kanjuro has disguised himself. I might have mentioned this at the end of last video, I'm not sure, but he's disguised himself as Oden and appeared in front of the scabbards. And, obviously the tragedy about this is that everyone knows it's a trick deep down, but this subconscious yearning for Oden, they want to believe that the impossible has come true. And that's shown through how Kiku chastises him for the disrespect of doing this, and yet can't really strike the finishing blow, causing her to get impaled by Kanjuro. Kinemon is beside himself with grief and rage for multiple reasons and just cuts down Kanjuro here. But what must he be experiencing and going through here? It's almost impossible to sort of conceptualize for me. Kanjuro sort of laughs maniacally as this happens, saying that it's poetic and fitting for, on this stage, Kinemon to cut him down, as they were the closest of friends. And then just as that happens, Kaido crashes through the ceiling, going for Momonosuke, and Shinobu grabs Momonosuke and gets him out of there, as Kinemon desires to fight him off. And Momo is screaming, so fearful of what's about to happen to these people he loves. And just as this happens, Onigashima reaches the mainland. So Sanji then joins in the fight with Chopper to take on Queen. And that leads to something which we'll get into eventually, really, really good stuff. Kinemon then comes into contact with Kaido, and Kinemon reflects on sort of the pseudo or the quasi-father role that he's taken up in Momo's life and the beautiful relationship between them in a really quick sort of flashback, and it's really beautiful. And this sort of empowers him and inspires him in this moment to take on Kaido and to have the courage to do so. And it's not like he wasn't going to before, but this gives him the final impetus to do so. So he faces off against Kaido to defend his shogun, to defend his home. And Kaido says something that I think is beautiful. He says, "What are these few seconds going to buy you?" He cannot understand why he would do this, and he sees just futility in it. But one thing that One Piece has shown throughout is that just a few seconds of courage can make all the difference. Little accumulating acts over time can build up into something grand and huge and world-defining. And that was what happened in Marineford with Kobe. His few seconds of courage standing up to a Kainu, David versus Goliath, allowed Shanks to have the time to come in and stop the war. It's similar here, even maybe to a greater extent, as all these wills to defend this home and to defend Wano and to defend the people they care about all coalesce and add up and allow Luffy to have the platform to then properly defeat Kaido later on and free Wano. And Kinemon is a great example of it here. Kaido cannot understand this defiance or how these little acts will lead to any substantial change, but it will. And it's a sort of flaw or a little wrinkle in his programming. He doesn't really get it. And he says that the problem with defeat is that so few can accept it when it arrives. And I feel like he's speaking from experience a little bit there. I think that he is someone, or he relates to the idea, rather. He is someone who, when defeat comes, will accept it readily, who yearns for his defeat, because death will complete him, as he says. Will it, though? Not like this, I don't think. For all the reasons I've talked about before, and I've talked about in my video. Now, he defeats Kinemon, and it looks like he's gonna die, but Kinemon ends up being okay. And Momo then hears Luffy, realizes that he's hearing Luffy's voice, who tells him that he will defeat Kaido and to just keep going. And so Momo transmits this to the rest of the characters, to everyone else fighting, saying, hang in there, Luffy will take on Kaido, he will win, we just have to keep going, to keep this hope up, even in the darkest of times. And who is as great an embodiment of this hope as anything else? Yamato. Yamato then takes on his father, Kaido, and then the two begin fighting, and let me just say, I saw this in the anime, it was absolutely beautiful, across multiple episodes, of course, and I didn't see all of it, but the bits I did see, there was some beautiful imagery, beautiful animation, it was incredible. And Yamato says that he wants to go out to sea to be with Luffy, to be a Straw Hat, and that he wants to defy what Kaido wants for him. And we'll get into that a little bit later, we'll touch on that. It's interesting because Yamato definitely has the spirit of a Straw Hat, this improbable dream, this yearning, this lust for freedom and dreams, and just the general overall spirit. It's very Straw Hat-esque. However, it doesn't seem like the right point in Yamato's life to become a Straw Hat. It doesn't feel like, in terms of his developmental arc, it's time for that. Actually, I guess I'm just getting into it here. To me, it felt like Yamato was a character who, maybe later in life, would fit the bill of a Straw Hat, but not just yet, because a lot needs to be taken care of on Wano, and simply put, Yamato is still embodying the identity of Odin, and I'm not going to judge or anything. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Anyone can live their life the way they want to live their life, and Yamato has a very unique perspective. However, I think that a big part of the Straw Hats is this individualistic identity in their dream. And Yamato has a very individual dream baked into his characterization, but he's taken on Odin's name, and I think that there has to be some progression with regards to his own identity to set the foundation for him to contribute to the Straw Hats consistently before he can do that. And he doesn't have it just yet at the end of Wano. I don't believe he does. Now, I'm not saying that for sure Yamato is going to become a Straw Hat in 200, 300 chapters or something. I'm not saying that at all. It may never happen. It could very likely never happen. I'm just saying at this point in Yamato's life, it didn't make sense for me for him to join the Straw Hats because he had a lot of development to go through still. before that happens, before he can leave Wano and take on the sea. And so it felt weird to me. It felt a little off, the idea that he would join the Straw Hats, which is why it made sense to me when he didn't. You know, would I love Yamato on the Straw Hats? Yeah, it would be great, it would be awesome. But I think in terms of the structure of the story and his own personal development and who he is as a person, I think he had a little bit of growing to do still. Understandably, given his upbringing. Anyways, they fight. Kaido says some interesting things throughout this, like Yamato wasn't meant to eat that fruit, it was meant to rule over Wano, whereas Yamato wants to use it to free Wano. Also, Yamato just says, I was hungry, that's why I ate it, which is adorable. And Yamato essentially touts and champions the importance of Luffy, that Luffy is the promised person to liberate Wano, and that he will fight until he's ready, just like everyone else is fighting. Meanwhile, Nami defeats Alti. Queen transforms to his beast form to take on Sanji. Tama rallies her troops, and Jinbei fights Who's Who in an incredibly hilarious exchange to me, where Who's Who is such a weird-ass character, man. This guy who was a CP9 agent who was in Impel Down, but then escaped, and who's really racist to Jinbei, and Jinbei goes, hey, that's out of style, and he goes, sorry about that. Anyways, I hate Nika, because, anyway, here's some exposition about Nika. Like, holy shit, that is some Chainsaw Man-esque pacing, and that's just me memeing. I like Chainsaw Man. I'm not slandering it. But, my god, like, holy shit, how many things do we have to take in for this character in this short sequence of time? But anyway, he drops this exposition, this legend about Nika, this legendary heroic figure who people don't even know if he exists, but they sort of worship him and pray to him and hope that he will liberate them in the form of any given generation's Joy Boy or Nika. You know, it's not well presented, I don't think it's good, but there's something charming about it, and the actual content is series defining. We learn that the Gum Gum fruit was stolen from a government ship as well, in addition to this, throughout this sort of section. And that is interesting. What sort of connection does that have to Nika? Why a government ship? Why would they take this? Especially considering Emu, and how Emu wants to snuff out all these lights and make it so that they never existed. Is the Gum Gum fruit an embodiment of sort of what Nika represents? I called it, when discussing this theory, the Sun fruit. But the thing is, I think the complexion here is not that Luffy's fated to do this. Or he is, but it's a soft determinism, I think. If you want to go that route, I think we're talking soft determinism. The fact that Luffy seems destined to succeed, that this story seems destined to bend to his will, the world destined to bend to his will, he's destined to be king of the pirates, he's this heaven-sent boy. I kind of love that element of One Piece. It makes it feel like a legend, like something that is, like that hope is going to win, no matter what. But I think it's soft determinism, if you're going that route. I think that it doesn't at all undercut Luffy's actions and agency and will and perseverance and story, and I think the story is very clear about that, through showing all of his struggles. So I think, my theory is that the Gum Gum fruit, this fruit, seeks out people that are worthy of it, rather than just appearing to someone who's not worthy and making them worthy. That's what I think. And it's just so beautiful, this notion that Who's Who brings up, that Nika was dreamt about. No one even knows if he exists. I hope we never learn if he exists. But Luffy is also this embodiment of dreams. He is this generation's Nika, except he's actualized, he's real. And I think he's more powerful in some ways than Nika because of that reality, and because he's also so grounded. And you know, Nika's really encouraging and important because it helps people to believe in the lowest of times. It gives them something to believe in. But Luffy's real, genuine. You can reach out and touch him. He is a living, breathing person, and he can gather others around his cause. He can change lives and make people feel encouraged to take on the challenges that they felt maybe they wouldn't have been able to take on. Like Momo, like the Straw Hats, like the people on Wano that he inspired to fight. Anyways, all the fights continue, the respective fights, and we see that CP0 agents are in tow, watching on, not really wanting the information divulged by Who's Who to come out into the open, because it shows that he has escaped from the world government's clutches. The CP0 agents and their role towards the end of Wano here is very interesting to me. Very interesting. There's some really cool lines, and I think it just broadens the spectrum of the world and how rich it feels, and I think it adds a cool layer to the world government and how they have their fingers in everything. And also they just have this really cool presence and aura. But Jinbei is Jinbei, so he defeats Husu anyway. Meanwhile, Frankie fights Sasaki, defeats Sasaki, and Yamato transforms into Zone form, Zone hybrid form. And the fight continues between Brooke and Robin and Black Maria. Robin is beautiful. Robin feels so empowered by Sanji's belief in her. Using the relationships that she opened herself up to empower her, and reflecting back on them, the value that they put into her life, being there for Sanji to lean on. She is so beautifully empowered by this, and she touts Sanji's importance and courage here, and his attributes and the beauty of all that he is, and his spirit and what he contributes, by saying that he's one of the wings of the future Pirate King's crew. Now, when this first happened, I just thought that Robin was saying that every one of the Straw Hats was a wing, and I think to an extent they are, but little things here and there have led me to think that maybe it's meant to be Zoro and Sanji. That's what a lot of people think. I think it could be either or. I think it's pretty arbitrary. A lot of people seem to focus on who are the wings, and it's definitely Zoro and Sanji. Maybe it is. I don't really think it matters. I think all that matters is that every single Straw Hat is a pillar of support that allows Luffy to do what he does through their connection and through their support and through their perseverance and their dreams. And Zoro and Sanji fulfill a very unique role. However, they're not better than any other Straw Hat. You know, Usopp fills a very specific role. Robin does. Chopper does. So yeah, maybe they are the two wings and the others play other roles. And Zoro and Sanji definitely are kindred spirits in a certain way. The number 2 and 3 of the monster trio. So maybe it is just them, but I think the take-home point that I want to address here is that it doesn't particularly matter who the wings are, to me, and it doesn't make them better than the other Straw Hats, and I don't think it really matters who the wings are. They all support Luffy, they're all part of his crew, they all support one another, and they're all pulling on the same chain and leading towards the same end. Meanwhile, Momo and Shinobu find the defeated Luffy, and Luffy says, he eats, and then he says, I'm gonna go up to fight Kaido in this final confrontation, and I need you, Momo, to fly me up. Caribou is watching on, by the way, throughout all of this little cockroach. But this is it. This is the payoff for Luffy and Momo's relationship. Luffy looks at Momo here, not as a little kid, but as an equal, as a partner that he wants to ride into battle with, and this is something that only Momo can do. However, it requires immense courage and sacrifice, and it's incredibly difficult. I really want to get this across, because for Momo to become this dragon form that can fly Luffy up, he needs to be aged up using Shinobu's powers. He needs to be aged up 20 years. I believe it's 20 years. It's something like that. He needs to become an adult, and he needs to give up his youth, his childhood, years of his life, just so that Luffy has the chance to fight Kaido, so he can bring Luffy up. And it's hard to properly articulate how profound that is, how profound what he is giving up here is. He is losing his innocence, he's losing his childhood, he's losing years of his life, and he's giving all that up. He's sacrificing essentially his life. He will never be able to learn to grow up, and he will never experience the things that teenagers experience. But I guess he was put into that situation anyway. Wano was put under this rule, and there are lots of others in Wano who would consider themselves lucky to be given the choice that Momo has, to live on just through giving up your youth, because there have been lives that have been taken away, lives sacrificed. And so Momo thinks of all of that and what his father represented, and the people he's trying to protect, and he makes the choice to give up his youth, to be aged up, to become this dragon, to fight with Luffy against Kaido. It's an immense sacrifice. It's a tragedy. And it reminds me a lot about the Hero of Time from the Legend of Zelda series. I won't get into it because of spoilers, but Ocarina of Time into Majora's Mask into Twilight Princess, there's an arc there that is really similar to what's going on with Momo. And it's just a profound tragedy that he has to do this, but also how admirable is it and courageous is it that he does. It's a sacrifice, and he is so brave for it. Just as Luffy will be king, he will be shogun. Now, in the meantime, the fight with Robin and Black Maria continues, and there is fire ablaze everywhere, reminiscent of Ohara, notably. And Robin is able to be empowered by her memories and what she's fighting for now to not allow this to affect her. And in this moment, she takes on the demon moniker. the demon moniker that was such a sign of pain for her in the past. The demons of Ohara, the demon child, the demon girl. That pain that it represented has followed her throughout her life, and it's only represented negativity. However, this is something that Nami does, something that Chopper does, something that Sanji does, in that just as Nami cannot change her past and what has happened to her, just as Chopper cannot change that he was called a monster, just as Sanji cannot change his blood, Robin cannot change that the Ohara tragedy is a part of her. You can't wash that clean. However, what you can do is change how you react to it. Nami changed her tattoo to completely reflect her view on life. She didn't let the tragedy define her. She let the tragedy and what she learned from it affect her and empower her to channel it into something productive. Chopper hated that he was called Monster, but he turned it into something positive. Sanji has taken strides towards learning to use his family's powers and his blood for his own goals, to use the life that his mom gave to him for his own goals, for what he believes is right. And in the same vein, Robin is able to channel the idea of a demon, of what a demon means, and use it to help the people she loves. And she's so strong to move past this. It's a huge moment. It's one of the biggest moments in Robin's development for me. And she embodies this demon, but uses it in such a positive way, moving past her trauma to protect those and that which she cares about, as she defeats Black Maria and Brooke comes in and takes out her subordinates. And it's all going off 15 minutes until Onigashima hits the flower capital. There's this great fight that emphasizes the trust and bond between Killer and Kid, as Killer fights Hawkins and uses these dolls to affect Kid, and they make their way out of it as Kid is fighting Big Mom. It's great stuff. Sanji is lugging Zoro around. Marco's a little bit tired. He's a little bit eepy. And then eventually Sanji and Zoro confront King and Queen and say that they want to take a look at Luffy when he becomes the true Pirate King, after this battle is won, which they think is an eventuality. Zoro and Sanji fight King and Queen, and there's some questions thrown about Zoro and his relationship or connection, and his similarities in stylistics and appearance to Ryuma. Interesting. And Sanji, about how Sanji's able to use these powers that are associated with him and his family, but he's able to do this without using Judge's modifications, which is something that Queen doesn't really understand. Inu and Neko are also fighting their own respective battles, and the moment occurs as this dragon descends upon Luffy, and it scares some of the townsfolk, but as Shinobu is weeping because of how what she's done has resulted in the spitting image of Odin, Momo descends, and in this unbelievable spread, in his majestic form, presents himself to Luffy, and Luffy recognizes him. He realizes what's going on, and the two of them resolve to take on Kaido together. It is a legendary moment. It's an iconic moment, and it feels like the turning tides of obviously Momo's life, but of history, where essentially the Shogun made the decision that will define the future of his home. At great personal cost, he has sacrificed himself for the sake of his home, and he has done something that would lead to its liberation. And I really think that what Momo does here is as important as what Luffy does throughout Wano. I think they are more or less equal partners in the liberation of Wano. They are the two most important single figures. Everyone did their part. Absolutely, everyone contributed, from the lives that were lost in 20 years ago, 10 years ago, now, the coalescing dreams of all those who thrust their torch forward. Everyone contributed, but I think Luffy and Momo are the two most important, and I don't think that Luffy is more important. You really have to think about what Momo gave up here to do this, and the courage he showed as he came into his own. It is beyond words, and so yeah, they resolved to take back Wano. And one more thing that I want to draw attention to is, as Sanji and Zoro were fighting, someone says that they don't want to be interrupted, they don't want help, this is their fight, and it's just a beautiful callback to Baratie, isn't it? As Sanji watched Zoro take on Mihawk, realizing through learning that he wouldn't have wanted his fight interrupted. It would have been a disrespect to him. And he saw this and he learned. And now here he is, side by side, fighting a very same fight, or a very similar fight, in the same spirit, with the man he learned that from. How beautiful, and that's something that can only happen in a story like One Piece. The fight between Yamato and Kaido rages on, and we see that in a weird form of respect for Yamato and his ambitions to be Odin, Kaido actually puts Yamato under a trial, a cruel trial, but one of endurance, very similar to the one that he put Odin under. So, in a weird way, cruel way, but he kind of respects those wishes, strangely. I think there are a lot of nuances to this, which I talk about again in my video, so I'm not going to go super into this, but it's really interesting and adds some cool little nuances to Kaido and Yamato's relationship and Kaido himself. It's also here where Kaido says one of my favorite lines that he ever says, or one of my favorite lines of Wano, which is that life is not a series of simple questions and simple answers. And he's speaking from experiences. He has asked so many questions, and he's come up completely empty with all of them. With regards to his life, his role, how things have come to this, and also I think that it's kind of a bit of a meta twist on Kaido. He isn't a simple character. Oda isn't going to present him in a simple, straightforward way. He's someone who's difficult to parse out, just as Kaido's life has been for him. And so it's a challenge, and it's not simple, just like life isn't. And this is all sort of the identity of his character for me, and I think it's beautifully done. Again, talked about this in my video, won't harp on this sort of stuff much, but wanted to draw attention to it. And there's a lot here during this point that I sort of thought about with regards to Kaido's relationship, or dynamic rather, with Luffy, Odin, and Momo, aesthetically, visually, spiritually, symbolically. And Yamato reflects on the friends he's made, like Ace and the people in the cave during that trial, as Luffy and Momo make their way to them. To other friends that have been made. And in a beautiful, beautiful moment, simultaneously, Luffy and Momo both confront Kaido, and Kaido is surprised seeing what Momo has become, and Momo proclaims all that he is. I am Kosuke Momonosuke, the man who will be the shogun of Wano. Just as Luffy proclaims that he will become the king of the pirates, Momo does the same thing in his own way. And Kaido shows a bit of respect here, but then he says, the world does not have a need for two dragons. And he may be right, but not necessarily in the way he thought. Now, the fights ensue, and I'll talk about the Kaido, Luffy, Momo stuff in a second, but Ninu and Neko continue to fight, and they're sort of embodiments of the Zou stuff, through their Sulong forms. And in this monumental clash, the clouds part, and the moon reveals itself once more. And the moon is something that Kaido blocked out earlier. It may signify the night, but the moon itself is a source of light, and it is an indicator that the sun is to come again, and it is a reflection of the sun. So Kaido would block that out, signaling the long night, literally and metaphorically. But the moon showing itself here is a great symbol of hope, because it represents Pedro, and it represents the Sulongs and their form, and how they are empowered by it. And how appropriate is it that they are empowered by it, sort of physiologically, of course, but also because of what it represents, and what Luffy represents, and how it signals that the dawn is coming. So I just love that connection between the Sulong forms and Pedro, and night and what it represents, and how Kaido was blocking it out, but then it unveils itself as the clouds part during the clash. It's beautiful stuff. Now, Momo and Luffy take on Kaido. Momo fights through a lot of his fears to attack him as well with Luffy's help, and it's beautiful. And something that I really want to draw attention to is that Luffy inspires Momo not because he used to be him, or be like him, because there are a few differences, but the similarities are key. Luffy is so important to him, outside of just his personality, because he knows what it's like to be scared, and to despair, and to need help. And Luffy, when he needed all that, he was brought out of that by Jinbei and by his crew. So he knows that Momo needs connection, and so he picks him up and elevates him through his connection and through his support, just as he learned after Sabaody, Marineford, Impel Down, and into the point where he cooked up his plan that happened during the time skip. So he knows the value of connection, and he knows that it will empower Momo, and it does. Now, how much does that contrast Kaido, who has very little connections, who has people following him purely out of fear or vicarious gratification of vicarious success, except for one person, which is important, and we'll get into that. But By and large, 99.9% of the time, Kaido is followed not because of connection, he is not supported by warmth, but by utility, or necessity, or power lust. There is very little 100% honest trust and honest relationships. There is one that I think is really important, and that could be a saving grace down the line. You know what, screw it, I'll just talk about it. It's King. It's King. Kaido saved King, King dedicated his life to Kaido, and yet Kaido doesn't really see King as a big, true, genuine, warm relationship. But it is. That is what Kaido's been searching for in one person. And I think that if Kaido is to live, because his death isn't confirmed, and if he is to progress, and maybe become the person he wanted to be but was so undercut by through his own cowardice and weakness of spirit, if he is to become that, it will be in large part due to King, reflecting back upon him the support he gave King. Just as Robin does to Sanji, just as Luffy does to Momo. It's all there, it's all cohesive, it's all beautiful thematically. But because Kaido is just so incapable of seeing all this, and having these relationships at this moment, that is why Momo and Luffy can combat him, and that is why he ultimately ends up losing. Part of why, at least. The fight rages on, and Momo is tasked with the duty of ensuring that Onigashima does not fall. That is his own battle. Kaido's power is failing as he fights Luffy, and Onigashima is going to crash, and Momo is trying to curtail that with his flame clouds, which is ace crumbs as well. That didn't sneak past me. But so that's Momo's battle, and Yamato's trying to support him through it. Also, at the same time, Zoro and King face off properly in what ends up being one of my absolute favorite fights in the entire series. Meanwhile, CP0 agents are keeping an eye on everything, once again, very interesting, and they cannot allow Kaido to be beaten, but they're watching on with great interest, wondering if they'll have to intervene. But they're on the phone, or the snail transponder rather, with Lucci, who says that they need to bring back Nico Robin, who is making her way through with Brook. Interesting. And Sanji and Queen fight in a really interesting sort of sequence that shows that Sanji's body is undergoing some changes. He wonders if it's due to his father's modifications that he doesn't really want to show. And, you know, there's some funny gags here, but I think what's really important is that it shows how determined Sanji is to not give in and allow that to define him. As always, he has principles and convictions over life, and so if he doesn't want to do something, if it goes against his principles and the way he views the world, he will die. He is willing to die. And in this case, there are allusions to the idea that he would rather die than live as his family lives, because it is something that he just finds so blasphemous. And this really seriously worries Sanji. He wonders if he's losing his humanity, and he doesn't want to live like that. And here is where we get the payoff to what I was talking about earlier with Kid and Killer and Big Mom and Hawkins, where Killer cuts off Hawkins' left arm, therefore not allowing that pain to transfer to Kid because Kid doesn't have a left arm. Killer then gets rid of the doll and is able to cut him down. It's a really awesome moment. And Kid is empowered by this, he's not really debilitated anymore, and he is free. The chains are off, and he's free to express himself as he likes. And Killer goes, "Get going, partner." It's really, really great stuff that had me buying into their relationship more than ever before. Again, Wano has consistently really great stuff for Kid and Killer. Like, I get that they're not the main characters of this arc. I get that, you know, power scaling causes them to be slandered, specifically Kid. But, you know, you can't deny that the writing here is really, really good. Meanwhile, Apu gives an alliance proposal to Drake. And then after the seemingly mortal peril that Kinemon was in, Nami and Zoro see that his legs, just like on Punk Hazard, are running around talking with their poo and toots and, flatulence. And, you know, the reasoning here for why Kinemon's alive is essentially that after Law attached him back, he was never properly attached again, so it doesn't really matter that he's mortally wounded in the place where that bisection was. Sure, you know what? Sure. It's really lazy. It's really kind of like flimsily put together. just to avoid his death here. I don't think it's good, but it doesn't really bother me much. It's nothing that's super out of the realms of One Piece's believability, I don't think. It's just kind of lazy. That part doesn't really bother me as much, but man, the poots and the poo and the toots, like, that is so tonally out of place here. For him to be talking with these farts to Nami and Usopp and being all silly like that, that to me was more annoying than the actual plot device of him not being killed. So I just wish Oda would stop with that. Like, there's a place for silly humor, ideally funnier than fart humor, but there's a place for it, and I don't think it was right here. I think it was really sort of annoying that it took away and whiplashed from the tone of the moment. But hey, but what happens after this is peak as hell. Kinemon hears that Orochi, still alive, and Kanjuro, still alive, are discussing the plan going forward, and Orochi is beautifully manipulative here, as Kanjuro lays on death's door, and he says, you know, the curtain call, the curtain close, the big conclusion, the big finale, would be you giving a theatrical encore through representing the burning rage of the Kurozumi clan, that Kanjuro obviously has ties to. So he manipulates him here with the big theatrical poetry and his rage, the two elements of his character, the stage and his rage, that have led to who he is today. And so Kanjuro buys into it and forms this fiery demonic spirit, Kazenbo. And the goal here is to just set the fortress ablaze. And the fighting goes on elsewhere, everywhere at this point. Law and Kid together are taking on Big Mom, with much banter throughout. And Big Mom then sacrifices some life energy to get even bigger, scarier. She really just feels like this unbelievable force of nature, yet with immense, really good characterization to substantiate her. Like, she really feels like this incredible threat. To me, she felt like nearly as much of a threat as Kaido, if not as much of a threat. Meanwhile, with Sanji, he runs into a woman in the midst of the chaos, and she looks at him with immense fear, and so he assumes that, you know, he's in the process of undercutting his ideals of not harming women, and he's losing his humanity. And he thinks to himself as he faces off against Queen, he's confronted with the idea of either becoming stronger in a way that would benefit the Straw Hats through his strength, or maintaining himself. And he thinks, tell me, Luffy, which would you prefer? The regular flesh and blood me who turns into a whelpless wreck whenever I face an opponent who's a woman? Or a cruel, cold, emotionless warrior of science who can crush even monsters like him, as long as you give me the order? Which one's going to be more useful to the King of the Pirates? I don't know what'll happen yet, but here goes. And he makes up his mind, and what he does here is he crushes the canister and dismisses the potential for becoming stronger, strong enough to defeat someone like Queen, because he would rather die with his principles and humanity intact than live in a way that would contribute materially to Luffy's cause, but wouldn't be Sanji, the Sanji that Luffy loves and recruited. And the thing is, you know, he's making this decision for himself, and I don't think he'd go back on it even if Luffy disagreed, but I don't think Luffy would disagree. I'm quite sure he wouldn't. He would want Sanji to be Sanji, and Sanji is not Sanji if he's allowing his principles to be compromised. Strength is important, but it isn't as important as heart. And then Sanji does something amazing. He calls Zoro, and he says, you know, we're gonna beat the Beast Pirates soon, but if you see afterwards that I'm not in my right mind, please kill me. And, you know, Zoro is fighting in the midst of this, and I think he thinks to himself, you know, Sanji is catastrophizing. I think he understands this. I think he realizes that that won't come to pass, but rather than invalidating his feelings, he shows his trust in him and belief in him, and a great amount of sensitivity and tact by saying, okay, I will. If you're not in your right mind, I will kill you, but don't die before then. Keep fighting until then, until the very end, because I don't think Zoro thinks that that's going to happen. And so on the way to that, he wants this person who he cares so much for to live. But I also don't think that he's lying. I think that if somehow Sanji were to become someone else, I absolutely think he would. I just don't think he thinks that's going to happen. It's one of the highlights of Wano was this interaction for me. Now, as Kanjuro has become this specter of revenge, this ghost, this burning ghost of hatred and revenge, it just keeps moving throughout the building, throughout the palace, burning everything in its wake. And a lot of our protagonists, Yamato, Robin, Brook, a couple others, are facing off against it, trying to see what they can even do. Drake then confronts the CP0 agents who know who he is. King and Zoro continue their fight, and Zoro's finding it very difficult. He's struggling to get any hits in, and he hears a shamisen before Enma just erupts and starts draining his haki. But we see the source of that shamisen is Hiyori, who is posing as Komurasaki to manipulate Orochi. Now Zoro is in trouble as Enma keeps draining him. But he remembers back to his youth, 13 years prior, and he remembers that the blacksmith that was at his village of Shimotsuki, Kozaburo, was the creator of Enma, and through the words he remembers him telling young Zoro about Enma, he realizes that this sword chose him. He is worthy, and he is able to sort of empower himself and once again, sort of show belief in himself. And he's able to sort of stabilize himself, stabilize his haki, and realize that he can do this. And he remembers about the promise he made to Luffy all the way back when, that he'd be the world's greatest swordsman. Now that is a dream that he kind of had to put on the back burner a little bit, for the sake of his duty as this sort of right-hand man of Luffy. This role of protecting the crew and acting as this sort of advisor to Luffy, to sort of check him. His dream of becoming the strongest swordsman in the world took a bit of a backseat because he had to emphasize that during a period of time where that was needed. And I think that's exemplified through how he sort of bowed down to Mihawk to be taught by him. Although that also had implications and function to lead into his own dream, but nonetheless, nothing happened was a moment that I think really hindered his progress with regards to that, where he took on his captain's dream and put himself out there for him, and it sort of shifted the way he approached his life for a little bit. However, at this moment, he remembers that Luffy wouldn't want him to forget about his dream. He loves Zoro partly because of his dream, because he so fervently strives for it. This regression was sort of necessary for him to become stronger in these moments, as he says, I have a promise to keep to his captain of fulfilling his dream, and a promise to his best friend. Now, some seem to think that he's talking about Luffy as his captain and his best friend. To me, it's clear that he's talking about Luffy as his captain and Quina as his best friend. Like, to me, that's pretty damn clear. Now, Queen fights Sanji while sort of embodying and reflecting the powers of his brothers, the trauma that he has to literally confront and overpower. And both these fights happening in tandem is beautiful for both of our characters of Zoro and Sanji to overtake their past demons and progress forward. You know, Sanji faces his trauma, Zoro has this sort of existential crisis about how he approaches going forward with all the duties he has to juggle, and both are able to strive past it. Because Sanji defeats Queen after going through everything, staying true to his ideals, giving up his life, and as a result keeping his life, and not allowing himself to be overtaken for the sake of strength. And then he gives Chuji back to Some, the mouse back to the woman who was fearful of him, before he just passes out. Now we then go back to Zoro and King, and King's helmet comes off as we see that he is a Lunarian, a beautiful character design, this beautiful Lunarian form. And we get a bit of his backstory, seeing that he was experimented on by government officials and Kaido rescued him from that, and so he owes his life to him. So Kaido will be his king of the pirates, and we have two people who reflect one another, both right-hand men of prospective king of the pirates, ones whose dreams are coalescing with their own captain's dreams. But the thing is, Zoro has something to strive for individually as well, that Luffy supports, whereas Kaido sort of has cut himself off from King a little bit. King's life was changed when that happened, and Kaido told him, I'm the only one who can change this world. He had these ambitions to do this all the way back when. It's just that things got lost along the way. He took the wrong choice every step of the way. He lost himself, he undercut himself, which is notably something that Sanji didn't allow himself to do, that Zoro didn't allow himself to do. And that's, I think, the key. He lost his connections with others because he stopped acting in a way that was loyal to who he was. But anyway, I digress. Kaido's great. This all made me think about why the government need Lunarians in the first place. Really interesting. Put a pin in that. And it's just an amazing fight, specifically in the anime, which elevates this 100-fold. Not literally 100-fold, but you get what I mean. It is like one of the best adaptations of any chapter I've ever seen. And, you know, King's a sad character to me. He loves Kaido and is loyal to Kaido due to his love for him and now he freed him. And he says that Kaido will be the king of the pirates, but I think deep inside, Kaido has resigned himself to not being that and to being the gatekeeper. And so that's why I say that if Kaido is to survive, if he is to strive for more, King will have to inject that belief in him like he did to King. all the way back when. So at this moment, King is indebted to a ghost of himself, a ghost of the man that saved King. And no matter what, King resolves to achieve his dreams, no matter what they may be, because his life is indebted to him. As these two right-hand men, in a battle of strength and will for their king, just face off, and power prevails in the end. And notably, King's final attack reflects Kaido's dragon form. And there's some great imagery here, as King looks almost Luciferian, as this fallen angel who has intentionally fallen to Earth for the sake of whom he pledged himself to. But I digress. Zoro defeats him, and thus ends some amazingly efficient character work for King, and thematic stuff for Kaido and King, and what it means for the whole arc. Again, sorry, this is the last time I'll talk about it, but I talk a lot about King and his importance and his role in the video I made about Kaido, so check that out if you want to. As this angel is dragged down to Earth, Zoro proclaims that he might as well be the king of hell, as King reflects on how he thought that Kaido might be Joy Boy, and how that may have instilled that hope and idea in Kaido. There's so much depth to this fight, it's unbelievable. Now, as everything goes on, Usopp has an interesting little speech where he talks about the self-sacrificial nature of a lot of the scabbards, and how they seem to be rushing off to their death in the name of Odin. And Usopp talks about the value of life here. He cannot bring himself to agree with their perspective. He says, I have this immense will to live. I don't care how pathetic I look. I'm gonna live, because that's the only way that value can be wrought out of life, is if you live. That's the reason I'm here alive today, is what he tells them. And the thing is here is, I don't think that Usopp is I think this is a matter of perspective. I don't think that Usopp can see or feel the things that the scabbards feel. He didn't go through what they did. He didn't witness what they did. He didn't have the relationship with Odin that they did. He does not belong to Wano in the way they do. So I think that what he's saying is a little bit short-sighted, and he's not operating, it's not something that he'd be able to understand unless he was put in their position. Oftentimes I think that there are some things that you cannot really properly comment on in a way that is substantial without having been in someone's shoes. I can always give my opinion on issues that, LGBTQ people face, but I would never try to speak for them, because I am not them. I am in a privileged position, and I'm someone that cannot relate to them. So I try to listen, I try to learn, and I try to do all that I can to support them through that listening and learning, but I can never properly speak for them or be in their shoes, and I think it's disrespectful to act as if you can, because there are certain things you cannot understand unless you're in someone's shoes. So my point here is that Usopp is speaking a little bit tunnel-visioned. There is value in what they're doing, but of course there should be balance, and that is why Izo sees beauty in what Usopp says. Izo likes what he says. Don't just go off to your death. And I'm not in a rush to die and all that sort of thing. The scabbards have no qualms about dying in battle, but it has to be for something. The characters who die in Wano do it for a cause. Do it to support Odin's dream and to support their comrades in service of something. Obviously, it's better to live, but sometimes sacrifices have to be made. Yet those sacrifices should be in service of something. Do not waste your life. That is, I think, the common ground here that Izo realizes through Usopp's speech here. And so I think it's kind of beautiful. I think Usopp is a bit short-sighted, tunnel vision in what he's saying here, not operating off of enough perspective, but nonetheless, that's the beauty of alternate perspectives, right? Through seeing his perspective, that nonetheless doesn't really take everything into account, Izo is inspired. So it's a really interesting dynamic here. And there's a beautiful line that sort of hints at defiance as the CP0 agents say, as this battle rages on, don't you think they've already hit the limit of what human beings can achieve? When talking of the Straw Hats and Luffy and this entire cause. No. And I think what's implied here is that the limits are endless. There are no limits. And while a lot of this arc touted the darkness of humanity, there is always this light and perseverance and strength that is limitless. And this happens as Luffy and Kaido are having fun. Luffy is allowing Kaido to live out his dream of this dance with the devil at the peak of the human experience. And Kaido is being fulfilled here, as he is having fun with a grin as wide as anything. Right here, maybe at the end of his life, he is able to feel what he wanted to feel his entire life and wasn't able to, through Luffy. Also, a cool little detail back with Zoro and King is that King, due to his genetics, says that Zoro is biologically incapable of defeating him. This is something that Zoro despises because it's very similar to what Quina said about her at some point in time, that she's going to be biologically incapable of defeating Zoro because he's a man and she's a woman. So there's a bit of extra personal richness to that line. And notably, Raizo is in the midst of such heat. It's a cool little subtle bit of character development and character progression, because in the flashback, he was complaining the most about the heat. He was in trouble, but here, he doesn't even feel it. He's just tempered himself and strengthened himself so much that he doesn't even feel the heat that once caused him such fear. And then again, we have Luffy and Kaido, two boys full of joy, two kindred spirits in some ways, and, you know, it makes me think that maybe if Kaido was a bit stronger in spirit, if things had gone a bit differently, they'd be allies, maybe. Or, like, friendly adversaries. Not that they'd be on the same crew or anything, because how could one crew handle two people like that? They'd want their own dreams. They wouldn't want to serve someone. But I wonder if they'd be sort of adversarial, friendly adversaries if things were to go a little bit differently, because they're very similar, and Luffy is able to unlock this happiness for Kaido. The battle continues between Luffy and Kaido. Kaido begins drinking, which I think has some sort of happy and sad nuances to it. And then we cut to the 5 elders, the Gorosei, on Marijoa. They talk about this conflict and Kaido potentially being at risk and wanting Robin, and they learn what we see, which is this imposing, beautiful imagery of one of the most sort of legendary elements of One Piece's setting to me in Zunisha, as Zunisha approaches Wano, as the dawn of Joy Boy, this generation's Joy Boy, approaches. They then speak of a significant fruit whose name has been erased from the annals of history as it's imposed over the imagery of Zunisha approaching. Zunisha, who is associated with Joy Boy, who's associated with the rubber powers, who's associated with Luffy. Also, I thought it was really interesting that the figure of Nika that we saw through Who's Who's account of it, it looks like he has sort of rubbery limbs. So it's all adding up to something seemingly inevitable. Now, Izo has all these reflections about his role and how he hopes that Kiku and Kinemon and the others have escaped, and all that he's putting on the line here. And if I'm remembering correctly, these were his last lines before he so surprisingly was killed off-screen, unceremoniously, in a way that is a sort of anticlimax that I think is very good and very tragic, and is an example of dying for the cause right after he was inspired by Usopp's words and Usopp's perspective. So it's a very powerful moment for Izo here, as he puts himself out there against the CP0 agents to protect his friends. Yamato encounters Kanjudo's Kazenbo, this spectral, rageful ghost of fire, and Big Mom, Kid, and Law continue to fight, the latter two saying that they will do anything they can to prevent her from getting to the roof. Again, showing that Law, it's clear that Law has bought into sort of what Luffy represents. He would never admit it, but he's bought in. Kid has found himself doing this as well. They will not allow her to get to the roof because they understand what that represents, and they want to win for material reasons, obviously, but they also just find themselves wanting Luffy to win because of what he represents for this era of history and the world going forward. So they will do whatever they can to prevent Big Mom from obstructing Luffy's path. And they're doing serious damage to Big Mom. Now, throughout all of this, Big Mom talks about her legacy, how she's been powerful since before they were born or when they were infants, and that she's still in her prime, and that they don't know what they're up against, and all that sort of thing. And you really feel it. These words can be said, but it takes great presentation for you to really feel it, and I felt it. And with magnificent presentation everywhere, with these two seemingly on the verge of death, they land one final blow on Big Mom, and Law says that her era is over. This is the jump-off point, this is the transition. Now, this isn't quite the final nail in the coffin, as there is a struggle after this, but eventually Kid and Law, and I quote, sent her on her way to hell, as Kazenbo sort of whimpers and calls out for Orochi, the one person who was their solace. And then as Big Mom is drifting off, we get a bit of an internal monologue that I think was an allusion to something she said in the past, which is blaming Roger for telling everyone and kicking off this great age of piracy, after which all these kids, as she says, would rise up and they'd have to be the ones to deal with them. And she says, this is easy for you to say, you're dying, but just tell us about the One Piece before you die. Does it exist? It better. Her having this hope for it, this dream for it, and in that way, she's not so different from our protagonists. She panics as she lowers towards this volcano, thinking that she's so close to the One Piece, but so far. And she curses Kid and Law, and she says, don't you dare assume that this will kill me, before she falls into the volcano, and victory is given to Law and Kid. Now, I've given my thoughts about Kaido. I think it could go either way, and it could be fitting either way. With her, I think this is a great conclusion for her, but I also think that she can come back into the story, but if she does, it has to be in a different role, kind of like a personification of the Defiant Former Order, rather than the Gatekeeper. The role has to change if she comes back. With Kaido, I have strong feelings about him having a great arc and ascent if he survives and all the stuff that has to do with King, but it could also work that it was futile and that he dies. With Big Mom, I'll just wait and see. Maybe she's dead. Maybe. But she did say, don't you dare assume this'll kill me, so... And then we learn a revelation, which is that Zunisha was a companion of Joy Boy who caused a crime, committed a crime 800 years ago. And I think this has to do about why Zunisha is constantly wandering, seemingly in this prison of flesh, destined to just his atonement for whatever this crime may be, to just be to wander, as a monument to all those who wonder or try to reveal certain truths. I think this has to do with Joy Boy and the Void Sentry and Emu and the Iron Giant in Egghead. I think we've got a lot of puzzle pieces for what this could be alluding to, but we don't know exactly what that sin was. I just think, again, of Big Mom throughout this, she really is mentally still a little girl who was never able to move on, with dreams unfulfilled, who in some ways never really had a chance. This woman who doesn't want conflict, who wants a world of unity, as we see through Whole Cake Island. It's really sobering. And in the next chapter, Kaido sort of reflects solemnly on his first meeting with Big Mom. And you wonder, maybe at the end here, he's starting to see that he does have certain connections. King's the most important one, but Big Mom's an interesting one too. And Luffy says here that he is going to use his final Gear 4, which all seems to be lining up for maybe a bit of a level up. And Luffy proclaims this, that he is going to drive him out of Wano if it's the last thing he does. He wants to make it so that the people of Wano can eat. Meanwhile, Hiyori sort of proclaims who she is to Orochi and caves him in under the ceiling, making him unable to use his powers. Kid and Law are out of commission, so they can't help Luffy against Kaido, but they've cleared the way for him. Just like Sanji, just like Zoro, just like everyone else, and that is all he needs. And then we get to a moment where CP0 takes care of Drake. They fight Drake and they take care of him, and Drake says that he's doing what his justice compels him to do, and they say that they're jealous of him, which is so interesting to me, because what does that mean? What are the implications of that? Are they lacking in agency and unable to commit to their own ideas of justice? And is that why they are envious of him? Are they envious of people who are able to enact their own ideals on the world because they have no agency and they're committed to something for which they have no real ideological ties, but that they are compelled to work for anyway? Have they given up their agency? It's just a really interesting line for me about the lore of CP0 and their ideological stance or lack thereof, which I think it alludes to. And as this happens, we get this beautiful, beautiful interlaying of the festival going on. As Luffy fights Kaido and his Gear 4, he's got just a few hits left and they just fight toe to toe for this freedom. But then, as Kaido is in the midst of having his dream come true, of this immense, beautiful shonen fight, maybe a death that will complete him, maybe a victory that'll ascend him, CP0 comes in the way and distracts Luffy, causing him to be hit by a deathly blow, and they interfere with Kaido's duel, just like Sanji and Zoro didn't want to be interfered with, in the way that Luffy understood, that Katakuri understood, that all these kindred spirits seem to understand. They interfered with something sacred, and they caused Luffy to be distracted, getting him hurt and getting him hit by Kaido. And this is exactly what happened when his fight with Odin was interfered with. And at this point, he must seem like he's cursed. He's cursed for his fights to always be tampered with, for his ideals to always be out of his reach, for everything that he wants to be taken from him. And he despairs here. And it's interesting that in this chapter, Kaido says that losers are losers, that people speak romantically about losers with epithets, or epithets, however you pronounce it, and that it's a romanticization of their losses. But he says that victors need no epithet. Yet, he yearns for one. He yearns for people to love him. He yearns for what results when you lose. Yet he still wants to win. It's sort of a paradox. He longs to win, but he desires the things that come with losing, because the way that he has won has undercut his true self, and the way that he wants others to look at him. So that is why he wants this death that completes a person in the proper way for everything to be perfect, so that he can be loved, so that he can be celebrated. He's a paradox. So Luffy falls defeated, and Kaido is enraged. And in this wonderful spread, he faces off against the CP0 agent, who tips his hat, silent, as Kaido says, "I'm sure you're aware and prepared for what's going to happen next." This CP0 agent was totally willing to die if it meant ensuring Kaido's victory. They will give themselves over for this cause at the cost of their own life. And it really integrates with what he said to Drake, I think. How envious he is that Drake has the autonomy to enact his own justice. These people are cogs in the machine. They are puppets, it seems like. Now Kaido descends, telling everyone that Luffy has been defeated. A lot of people don't believe it. A lot of the Straw Hats don't seem to believe it. Kid seems to believe it and says that it was a short-lived dream. But, Nami's not really buying it just yet. As she's learned, there's been times before where Luffy's been proclaimed dead and he hasn't been. So the Straw Hats are defiant. And Kaido demands Momonosuke, and things are looking extremely dicey. However, Yamato continues to fight for the sake of what Luffy represents, for the sake of what Oden represents. And Yamato says to Momo that they can face death together. Momo is overtaken by fear, as is human and understandable. With the prospect of Luffy's defeat, his hope has taken a huge battering, but Yamato fuels it once more, and states the importance of fighting for what one believes in, even when it seems like all is lost. And right now, right in this moment, it happens. Momo hears Zunisha speaking to him, saying that he can hear it. It's been so long, and I feel chills as I just talk about this. I hear the drums of liberation. For the first time in 800 years, he is here. Joy Boy has returned. It speaks for itself. This is the payoff for 1,000+ chapters of sun imagery and what Luffy represents, and dreams and freedom. It's hundreds of chapters of build-up plot-wise, 1,000 chapters of build-up thematically, and this is what it's led to. I've heard that some people somehow think this is an ass pull, that it wasn't foreshadowed. This is one of the most overly foreshadowed things I've seen in any story. You can tell that this is coming from Skypiea. That's when I started clocking it, maybe even before then. And there's allusions to it before then. It's all clear. I'm not saying that Oda planned everything out to the letter, but this general concept was foreshadowed for ages. And you really just have to be honest in reading the story to realize that. Regardless, I don't even know what to say here. This is just everything I've been talking about in this series distilled into one plot development and one moment as Luffy grins, and we see his hair kind of shifting. Notably, I think Luffy's grin is very representative and an intentional similarity to Oden's seemingly taunting grin as he floated down into the pot after Kaido shot him. These two haunting grins of joy that show him what he is not. And G5 occurs. Straight up, this is my favorite moment in One Piece because of the emotional payoff, the thematic payoff. Everything's been leading to this moment, what it means for the lore, how it makes Luffy this legendary symbol of hope that is a hero, but actualized as well. The design is awesome. It's maybe my favorite design in One Piece. I love it. And the silliness, the absurdity, the Looney Tunes nature of the presentation as Luffy is filled with this confidence and this laughter that almost seems a little bit out of his control, which is interesting and may lead to something down the line. But nonetheless, of course it's absurd. I know that some people don't like the Looney Tunes-esque nature of it, but when you're fighting against this sort of corruption, this sort of darkness, what else is there to do but smile? As Luffy sort of implores Kaido to smile and grit those teeth as he sort of beats him into submission, and Kaido, I think, seems to look at Luffy with a reluctant inspiration, aspiration. I think Luffy inspires him here. I think that he is moved in seeing something that he aspired to be, realized he wouldn't become, then became a gatekeeper for, but always held those aspirations, and he's seeing it in the flesh. And I think in spite of himself, he can't help but admire and be inspired. And I think Luffy, in combination with King, are the two things that could give him an ascent if he were to live. And again, with regards to the silliness, obviously it works thematically. Like, what do you combat darkness with? Laughter, smiles, the stuff that Wano sort of represented and wants to come back to. All that Luffy represents, taking on life with a smile, looking at the horizon and embracing it, rather than despairing. But also, is it not totally in keeping with the tone of One Piece? Now, I do think that Oda has a bit of a challenge going forward, as I don't think you can make every single fight like this the same. The whole Drums of Liberation are peak, unbelievably peak. The track is great. In the anime, it's wonderful. I think that's something for which the novelty could wear off, and so I don't think every fight can have the same tone going forward. The story can't become monotonous with Luffy doing the same thing and the tone being the same for every fight where Luffy gets into G5. So it's an interesting challenge for Oda going forward, but for this, it is perfect. Luffy's kind of brute forcing Kaido into genuine smiles and laughter, into believing, into the little boy he once was. And the art is spectacular, goes without saying. Some of these poses, the hand over the eyes, Luffy silhouetted against the moon, the dawn to reflect upon the moon. It's just beautiful. It's the payoff we've been waiting for. It's Skypiea, it's Chapter 1, it's Luffy in general, it's Zoe. It's been built up for the entire story, and the payoff, it is one of my favorite examples of payoff in any story. It honestly changed my life to an extent, and I think it's masterful. If you look to my left and your right on screen, you can see a poster of G5 that I got at Anime North. And if you look, let me just move. I mean, there's some more G5 stuff right there. And if you look above my head, another G5 thing. So, needless to say, I kind of like G5. I love it. I think everything it represents is essentially spot on, and I think Oda was pulling off his greatest masterstroke with this. I think there are other moments that come close. Roger laughing, 967. Episode 1015, the 1000th chapter, even though that's the anime specifically I'm thinking of, but that comes close. Bink Sake, the end of Skypiea, the end of post-war, I have my crew. These are all moments that I think are close, but G5 remains my favorite moment, and it's because of all that it represents distilled in one moment. It has everything to do with One Piece. It has everything to do with hope and inspiration and dreams, and it's been built up. Every single panel feels like it's been leading to this moment, and it doesn't disappoint. Not in the slightest. And I also like that part of Luffy's ability is to be able to manipulate his surroundings like rubber, to transfer that onto his surroundings, sort of embodying the infectious hope and inspiration he imbues upon others. I think that's really great. And it does get a little dicey. Luffy does get pegged back and Kaido does adjust, and he's faced with great difficulty. But there was never a doubt in my mind that Luffy was going to win this because there was just an inevitability to it. Kaido is always going to lose. The darkness is always going to lose against this element of hope. And I firmly believe that One Piece will end with that. Kaido is gone after Wano, and he is replaced by darker figures that embody this darkness in Blackbeard and Imu specifically, who seems to be an embodiment of despair and maybe evil. And Imu tries to shut out the light, but you just can't indefinitely. You can't. People will always hope. People will always dream. And legends and legacy and stories will bring forth that camaraderie and kinship and this connection with others that will help pull each other up through these connections. Just hope will always exist, the enduring human spirit. And because of that, darkness will always be defeated. With regards to One Piece, we get a flashback to Momonosuke when, wow, I'm getting a little teared up, when his mother sent him and Kinemon and Kanjiro back in time to allow for this fighting chance, this glimmer of hope, and how Kinemon asked him to allow him to die as samurai, contributing to this cause. And Momo was courageous in this moment to say, I'm ready, I will go. That was one of the first of many courageous decisions he made, leading up to, I think, what happens here, which is his ability to work with Luffy to save Wano, as Wano celebrates and the festival continues, and they're fighting for their lives on Wano. And these people don't know if they'll live to see tomorrow, but they hope, and as long as they have that hope, it's enough. So in this moment, Luffy trusts Momo to move Onigashima out of the way as he prepares this gigantic fist to finish off Kaido. And he says, I believe in you. And that's all he needs. He has the courage and the fortitude within him. He just needs a little bit of belief. I can't believe he's 8 years old. Momo succeeds here. He gets Onigashima out of the way for Luffy's attack. Kaido, with his last gasp, fights back, and the two attacks sort of clash, as Kaido says, kind of respects all that they represent and says, come at me with all you have. You're the heroes. I am the villain. Sort of this role that he's thrust upon himself. And Kawamatsu thinks back to the events of 20 years ago and all the misery that they're trying to curtail and shove off, and the sort of sparks of grief and emotion and sentiment that started this rebellion, and all the pain that ensued, and all of that. And as we see Orochi's horrific crimes, we then come to him in the present, where he attempts to attack Komurasaki, Hiyori, and just in time, Denjiro cuts off his head. As we see, beautifully, a panel of a wish sent into the beyond from someone during the festival, saying, I wish Orochi would go away. A wish granted. Luffy and Kaido are clashing as this happens, and this specifically happening for Hiyori and Denjiro, a combination of their efforts, is perfect to me, as these two are the ones who had to be closest to him for ages, for years, and as a result, came most in contact with his evil, with how disgusting he is. And here we get the, I guess, infamous, controversial Kaido backstory, where we learn a lot of things that I think we knew already, but that gets outright confirmed and adds a bit of interesting complexions to it. We see that, like many, he was used kind of as a tool to prop others up for their own selfish means, and he grew to hate the world's government. He joined the Rocks Pirates. He had this fervent desire to turn the world upside down for reasons that are very similar to a lot of our protagonists. We see very quickly through just a few pages his development of strength as he was fueled by this fervent desire to fight back. And, it's not a lot. It doesn't change a lot of his character. It sort of confirms some things, it changes the complexion of a couple of lines maybe, and it sets in stone some things I'd been interpreting already, but it doesn't change a lot. And I don't know, I really like his backstory a lot. I don't think it's one of the best, I don't think it can be when it's something like this. It's not a huge Corazon Law flashback, it's not a Bank Sake, it's not an ASL, it's not a Robin, it's not a Noland, but it isn't trying to be. And I think a lot of people, through being disappointed with this, may have just, I'm not going to be condescending enough to say that you don't get it. Like, I'm not going to say stuff like that. I don't mean that. But maybe you weren't adequately engaged enough to want to dig deep enough into the subtext of Kaido, whereas this sort of backstory would make sense and not be disappointing. Because in the build-up to it, like, I'd be talking about, is Kaido going to get a backstory? And it got to the point where I'm like, okay, Kaido is approached so subtextually, so minimalistically, and it totally makes him stand out, makes him unique as a character in his presentation, and feeds into the ideas associated with his character. Simple questions, simple answers, the sort of confusion he approached life with. It all works stylistically, that he is this subtextual, breadcrumb-like puzzle of a character that you have to put together yourself. That's kind of difficult, kind of like Crollo in that way. So it came to a point, though, where I'm like, I hope we kind of don't get a big backstory. I hope it's quick if we get one. I'd be down if we don't get one. And we got this, and it was perfect for me. It was perfect. I needed nothing less, nothing more. It confirmed the things about why he wanted to turn the world upside down, how he blazed this path for himself, why he looks at the world government the way he does. And yeah, I don't think it needed to be anything huge. I don't think it needed to add to him because there's already so much substance there. You just kind of have to parse through some stuff to look for it. You just have to interpret some stuff. Now, there could be a moment in the future where we get a full-on Rocks backstory that divulges into Kaido as a character completely, and this changes. And at that point, we'll evaluate it when it comes. But as it stands now, assuming Kaido doesn't get much more significant stuff, I am very happy with this backstory, and it is in keeping with the style that Oda's portrayed for him so far. It sort of confirms the gatekeeper element of him, and the chronology to me really also confirms that he wanted to be Joy Boy. And also, the fact that he doesn't get this backstory is kind of meta, isn't it? All these characters who are main characters of their arcs get backstories. You know, Doflamingo got one. Even Katakuri got a bigger one than this. Hody Jones, even, who's a very different sort of antagonist. Blackbeard is much more front and center, but Kaido doesn't get one, really. He just gets a glimpse. And how appropriate is that for someone who is just basically talked about, and you get little ideas from word of mouth about who this guy is, and he doesn't divulge much, and you have to put the pieces together, and he wishes to be this figure, but just was never able to? This sort of man doesn't get the spotlight, because he's lived his life in a way that means that he has deprived himself of that, so he doesn't get a huge backstory. Just a glimpse. He's a side character to the actual legends that he aspired to be. Odin got a big backstory. Roger. Luffy. He aspired to be like these people, but because of the way he lived his life, he didn't really deserve one, and so he didn't get one. And it fits beautifully in that way. And also, I heard that, this leads into Luffy defeating Kaido, of course. I heard that some people were disappointed that Luffy beat him, in a way that others were not able to see it, but I kind of love that. I love that, because there was an arc, I don't remember exactly, maybe Alabasta, where the Straw Hats helped save the land and just left very quietly without much of a discussion or without much of a celebration for them, right? They celebrated with those who they cared about because they love a party, but they didn't want the acclaim or the notoriety or the credit. They're just there to do what they want to do, which is to help those they care about and to liberate. So that is just like this. Luffy defeats Kaido, and, you know, the citizens of Wano could almost mistake it for it being the wishes that they so fervently hoped for coming to reality, coming true, and Kaido being defeated. And how beautiful is that for this embodiment of this god of hope that may not even exist? The current generation Nika fulfilling these wishes. That's what Luffy is, and he doesn't need the credit. And so he is carrying forward the legend of Nika, you know, unintentionally. And my favorite thing about this last exchange is Kaido truly wonders and asks Luffy before he's defeated, what kind of world can you create, Straw Hat? I think it's genuine curiosity. And Luffy says, a world where my friends can eat as much food as they want. He screams as he defeats him. And we get this last memory. King, I think I know who Joy Boy is. Who is he? He's the man who shows up to beat me in the future. In that case, I suppose we'll never see him. And Wano is freed from his grasp, and he falls into the lava pit where Big Mom landed, causing an eruption with both of them there. It's looking dicey for them, but like I said, I don't think it's out of the possibility for either of them to survive. We'll have to wait and see. But for those on the ground, Toko and Hitetsu, they look up to the sky, this beautiful night sky, and wow, we see that Hitetsu's reflecting on all that's happened, and smiles looking up at the sky, at all the lanterns, these embodiments of hope and dreams, as we see that Toko's lantern doesn't have any specific wish. It just says, thank you, Daddy, for Yasu. And I don't think that there's a scene to better encapsulate Wano than that. Everyone celebrates, they're victorious. It is the biggest victory in the series yet. And interestingly enough, Momonosuke says he will not open the borders, and Zunisha respects that. And I like the decision a lot, because opening the borders may have worked 20-25 years ago, at the time of Odin's reign. But it's a different time now, and it distinguishes Momo from his father. It properly reinforces that he is acting on the will of his father, carrying forth his legacy, but he is his own person for this age, and he is the right shogun for this age. Yamato prevents the Beast Pirates from fighting any further. Luffy is declared the winner. Momo descends upon his people and declares their victory. Komurasaki and Denjiro return, and the new shogun is announced. Yamato declares that he will join the Straw Hats, we talked about that already, and Momo addresses his people, his, I guess, last challenge that he uses Luffy's help with. He says, my father gave me a name that means invincible. Under my rule, this parched and ruined land will turn into a paradise on earth. Lend me your strength and let us work towards this end together. I have traveled 20 years to save you all. From this day on, I, Kozuki Momonosuke, will lead the land of Wano. Mother, I will keep my promise, he thinks. Father, I will follow in your footsteps. And there are tears of celebration and happiness, and everyone's smiling, reflecting Luffy in Gear 5. This sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And they exclaim that the true shogunate has returned at last, the one that they've been waiting for so long. And when the warrior at last sheathed his blade, the sky of the day to come danced with spinning, fluttering petals. This is the land of the samurai. Here under the night blossom stands a handsome man of 8, blessed with great dedication and mercy, and a level of strength that can be forgiven. This is the birth of the man who would later be known around the world as the great shogun of Wano, Kosuke Momonosuke. And that is one of the greatest character arcs in One Piece, full stop. I didn't like Momo at first, but when we reached Zou, I realized that Oda was cooking something fierce with his character. Now, word of all that's happened and the inability to capture Robin and Wano not opening its borders and Kaido's defeat, it reaches around the world, and specifically the Five Elders, and the land revels. But we have a little moment between Hawkins and Drake, where Drake questions Hawkins a bit, and Hawkins says that he realized that his chances of survival, which is a line that he had earlier that he was ambiguous about, was 1%. And he expresses this admiration for Kid and Law, or Kid and Killer specifically, for standing up to Kaido when he was unable to, trapped by his fear. He was too full of shame and pride, an interesting mix of the two, to go back on himself and suck up to Kid. So he was locked into his decision, and he abides by the consequences as he perishes here. It's a great death for Hawkins, but the world celebrates all around a week later, and there are graves erected for and ceremonies for Odin and Izo and Ashura Doji. And just generally the Straw Hats are recovering, and there's lots of happy, fun, silly times, but we get a bit of a look at a figure who's observing from the distance what's going on in Wano. Ryokugyu, who's a really interesting figure, I think, elevated quite a bit by the anime's presentation and the voice acting. And finally, we get back with one of my favorite side characters in One Piece, and one of my favorite world elements of a character in Morgans, who, despite the wishes of the Gorosei, publishes the new bounties with full detail, including Luffy's new form, which they wanted to not released to the public. But Morgans has his own agenda, his own narratives. Just like us, he wants to see the best story possible, and conducive to that is revealing the truth here. And so we see 3 billion berries each for Luffy, Kid, and Law. The Luffy one is intentionally, for the sake of posturing and perception, a little underplayed. Celebrations continue around Wano, and then Robin talks with Kozuki Sukiyaki, who we see was the man who was known as Hitetsu. And we see that he was the former shogun of Wano. He was Odin's father. And he doesn't have any intent of telling Momo, but he's telling Robin this. And he has this immense shame because he's the one who allowed Orochi to seize control, as we saw. And how could he go public with this? And it's revealed here to Robin, and through him, that the ancient weapon Pluton is on Wano somewhere. Meanwhile, we cut right after that, Oda is cruel, to this horrific, hellish nightmare as Ryokugyu, without the approval of Akainu, just goes insane, sort of torturing and killing the beast pirates there, king and queen among them. And he has this ability to turn everything into these devastating roots that shoot up from the ground and pierce his enemies. It is a really cool, but really disturbing power. And he wants to bring Luffy's head to him, so that's why he's doing all this. And he shows some respect for Akainu, for Sakazuki. He says that he likes his attitude and he wants to be praised by him. So that's cool. He has this sort of rancor and rage to him that I find really interesting, and this disdain that I didn't really notice earlier when we first saw him in his first appearance. But he's interesting. He's an interesting hook going forward. Now, Luffy congratulates everyone. They have this gigantic party, as they tend to do at the end of arcs. Everyone's having fun, including Carrot. And then Kid, upset at something, goes up to Luffy and shows him something, and that is that the new emperors have been declared. Shanks, who is still there as sort of this bridge between the eras, and this willing gatekeeper to bring forth the new era that he believes in Luffy, who, by his nature, I believe, is not capable of being the king, the center of the new era, but rather this amazing support, because that's just the role he chooses for himself. Anyways, I digress. Shanks is amazing. But Shanks is there. We knew he would. Blackbeard's there. Makes sense. Luffy's there, officially. And the last one is Buggy, the genius jester. I couldn't believe it. And it's so exciting for the future of the story, and it makes so much sense. It's just perfect for the progression of the narrative of Buggy in general, and the way he consistently, half genuinely falls upward, but also has his merits and specific charisma. It's great. And at the same time, Ryokugyu makes his way towards Wano, despising the party that's happening. Now, Ryokugyu is stopped by the 9 Scabbards and Yamato and Momo to defend their land, which is a cool little sort of test for them, so close to the beginning of this new era in Wano. And we see Shanks proudly looking at this new photo of Luffy's bounty, and he decides here not to go after Luffy, but instead to progress things towards the direction long-term of their promise. Luffy is a proper pirate now. I think he's admitted this, but I think he realizes that, I think at least, he will be one of Luffy's final antagonistic tests. Again, he's not going to be a villain. I don't think so at all, but I think they're going to square off in some sort of fashion as one of the final tests for Luffy to become the king of the pirates. It just feels like the natural way to fulfill their promise. And he reflects back to his time with Luffy and decides, as he grasps his stump, I guess, that he will go to claim the One Piece, go towards the One Piece, because that is what the promise entails. They're going to meet at the top. And I don't think that Shanks wants this at all for himself. I think he's going to claim the One Piece because the role he has taken up is the ultimate mentor and catalyst for Luffy to succeed in all the ways he wants to succeed. And I think the way he does this is by going for the same goal. Meanwhile, we get a bomb dropped on us saying that Sabo has been declared the murderer of Nefeltari Cobra, and that Vivi has disappeared. Now, anyone who knows anything about this story knows that it's not that simple. There's clearly more to it. Vivi's disappeared for a reason. She's not dead or anything. There's more to the Sabo murders Cobra thing, because while Sabo's been unhinged and going off the rails, he wouldn't do that for no reason. There's something going on. There's more to it. But nonetheless, it's super, super engaging. It's a great hook going forward. And due to this, Sabo's started to be worshipped as this revolutionary king who sort of spits in the face of royalty. But it's clear that there's more to this story. And Kizaru, who's at this meeting, says, and his brother is one of the emperors of the sea now. Quite a family. And Akainu, in the face of all of this, sort of restates and proclaims his determination. He says, "This is one hell of an age that I had to be fleet admiral in, but no matter who comes at us, I'll drive each and every one of them into the depths of the sea." And Momonosuke and the rest sort of prove that they are capable of defending this new era of Wano, like I said. Momonosuke specifically drawing attention to it, like, we can't depend on Luffy for everything, we need to be able to defend our home, and Ryokugyu is a great challenge for that in this moment. Now, they fight him back, but he seems to only back off properly because he senses Shanks, who then gives us his iconic line, "Are you that afraid of the new era?" Thinking of all these promising new, well-spirited people that he believes in, truly, that he is trying to be the bridge for and help usher them into the new era. Ryokugyu, through what he's doing, is the antithesis of all that Shanks stands for, and so he despises what he's doing. And he is illustrated so beautifully here. Are you that afraid of the new era, this fierce determination? As the party goes on and Luffy looks on at what Momo did and felt the haki that reminded him of a familiar face. But then we get a revelation. Law joins Robin and Sukiyaki, and it's revealed to them that Wano once existed underwater and that the Pluton rested there, along with the road poneglyph. This was a Wano of 800 years ago, 800 being the key word. Void Century, Emu, Joy Boy, the sins of Zunisha. Interesting. But Wano was once this gigantic mountain. Walls were built up around it, and it filled with rainwater, and then everything else flooded around it. Now, we do have some stuff to discuss later, I guess, for Egghead stuff, about the world being submerged slowly, which I think ties in with this. But this in and of itself is really, really interesting, and we get to the road poneglyph. Sukiyaki says that he cannot give them the Pluton because the walls will need to be torn down. Opening the borders means destroying the country's natural defenses and unleashing an ancient weapon onto the world. And that isn't something that he's willing to do for a bunch of reasons at this moment. And it's interesting because it sort of indicates something about some sort of knowledge that Odin was privy to, but that they're not. Just that info was passed down, and he is passing it on to them, and he doesn't know why that info exists at all. Now, we then see that Carrot's been elected as the new ruler of the Mokomo Dukedom, because Inu and Neko are going to serve Momonosuke and Wano. That seems kind of weird to me. I love Carrot. I love Carrot beyond words, but she doesn't strike me as a leader in that sense, like in that specific ruler sense. It's weird to me. It doesn't really fit with her personality, so we'll see how it goes, but it's a strange decision. I guess we'll see where it goes. Now, Caribou overhears when the Straw Hats learn about this that the Pluton is in Wano and has some really important information. And Luffy, the Straw Hats, Yamato say bye to everyone without telling Momonosuke and Kinemon. And as they're saying goodbye to the to Law and Kid, they learn through Kid that Mihawk, Crocodile, and Buggy have formed a faction called the Cross Guild, which is sort of the opposite of the Marines, who issue bounties on pirates, through issuing bounties on Marines. And I love this. It is such a natural opposition to the way that the world is structured, formed by people in power on the other side. It's just natural that something like this would come about, and I love the three in charge. Their dynamic between the three of them, Buggy, Mihawk, Crocodile, and how, like, Buggy is treated as this fool, understandably, but also is shown to have this charisma that they can't really account for, and kind of have to cede to a little bit. It's awesome. It is such a great element added to One Piece's world building and just the world going forward, and I love it. Meanwhile, Yamato says goodbye to Kinemon and Momonosuke and says that he's going to join the Straw Hats. Now, Momo is of course very upset that they haven't said bye to him. So as we have this beautiful narration as this arc comes to a close in chapter 1057, through this sort of Rakugo-esque play, that is done, again, elevated in the anime beautifully. Momonosuke thinks back to all that Luffy's done for him and their journey together and their journey to freedom, and goes, why wouldn't they say bye to me? He's really upset about this. So is Kinemon. And then we learn that Yamato actually decided not to join them right now because he wants to learn more about the world by traveling throughout Wano and more about himself. And like I said, I think that's the right move for the character and for the story. And they finally find the Straw Hats, and Momonosuke is obviously really upset. And Luffy says, but you're here now, aren't you? I knew you'd come. And he just starts bawling, like the little boy that he is. He says, stay with me forever. I'll miss you so much. And it's a beautiful moment of vulnerability for someone who is a child. And I think it's necessary to have him, to allow him to have these moments. He sacrificed so much, but he is a child. And if he's forced to forget that and dismiss that, I don't think it'll be good for his psychology and mentality at all. And he says, I don't want to say goodbye. He says, I was able to do all this because of you, and you mean so much to me, and I don't want to say goodbye. He says, I'm too stupid. I don't have the words to express my feelings, but I'm scared of what's ahead. Please don't go. And Luffy gives him their flag. And he says, you're an idiot and a coward and a weakling, but I think of you as my little brother. Luffy going into the role of older brother after Ace, sort of coming into his own here. When times are hard, he says, just remember our adventures at sea. Fly this flag over Wano. If anyone shows up causing trouble, let them see it. They'll know that if anyone messes with my crew, they're picking a fight with us. And Momo says, you'd call me one of you? And of course he would. And Momo says, one day I will surpass Kosuke Oden. And Kinemon says, I'll be there to see it. And as all this comes to pass, the Rakugo play hybrid concludes with telling the victory of Luffy and crew, the liberation of Wano. This has been the saga of mighty samurai regaining their lost glory to shine as before. That's all the time we have today. While our ways might part for now, may our paths cross again, someday, somewhere. The end. And thus ends the Wano arc. My favorite arc in One Piece up till this point. There are flaws, many of which I've talked about. It is bloated, it's got some pacing issues, it has some thematically undercutting bits, there are some character decisions that are a bit odd. You'll never hear me calling this perfect, but nonetheless, it is my favorite for the sheer amount of payoff and sentiment and thematics at play here, the beauty and the emotions of the characters and the bonds forged here, the goodbyes, the ushering in of a new chapter, while concluding this part of the story. And to me, Wano is, in a lot of ways, one of my favorite things, which is a story about stories, through how it opens and how it concludes and how it fits into the One Piece mythos and the overall narrative. It has darkness and hope and heroes from top to bottom, perseverance, inspiration, dreams, and freedom. It's a legend that will become folklore and has begun to become folklore. Just like One Piece will be a legend crystallized here. And this is why Wano will continue to be told throughout the lands of Wano and throughout the world, and why One Piece will be continued to be told in our world. Wano is made in One Piece's image. It inspires, it encourages you to dream, it encourages you to hope, and that's why we love Wano, and that's why we love One Piece. It's a story about stories. Wano is just amazing, and it's been such a joy to share my experience of it with you guys, on stream and in here. I don't have much else to say about it. I think I've said it all. It's just been so special. And I know some don't like Wano, some think it's bad. Couldn't disagree more personally. I respect it, but I couldn't disagree more. This is my favorite arc, just ahead of Marineford, just ahead of the likes of Skypiea, Water 7, and Enies Lobby. We'll see how Egghead pans out, but yeah. Amazing arc, and let's conclude with my character ranking, of which we have a bit of a different structure this time around. So here we are. As you can see, we've got a tier list. These are my takes post-Wano. I did this after my stream, so it's up to date. So the only difference here is I have Kaido at number 5 and Roger at number 6. I'd switch them around. I'd have Kaido at 6 and Roger at 5. But anyway, if we're counting from 25, the top 25, we got... you know what? Let me just list out some of the S tier. That's better. I think that's better. I will say that Emu is absolutely an honorable mention too. But for the S tier, we have Jinbei, Buggy, Noland, Blackbeard, Momo, Corazon, Fujitora, Brook, Kairos, Wiper, Fisher Tiger, Pedro, Kinemon, Kanjudo, Carrot, Chopper, King, Morgans, Otochi, and Big Mom. The order isn't really set in stone with this. It's a little bit shifted around. Big Mom, I'd say it would be a little bit higher. Maybe King as well, but this is pretty accurate for the S tier. Then, post-Wano, this is ordered pretty accurately. S plus tier, Ace, Odin, Sanji, Vivi, Garp, and Law. Law and then Garp. And then in double S, we have Shanks, Katakuri, Robin, Zoro, and Nami. And if you're counting, my top 10 would be Nami at 11, Zoro at 10, Robin at 9, Katakuri at 8, Shanks at 7, Kaido at 6, Roger at 5, Usopp, Whitebeard, Doflamingo, and then Luffy. I really can't envision a future where Luffy isn't my number 1. He is just everything, and Wano is maybe his best arc. Anyways, those are my character rankings. Thought it would be easier to just show the tier list I did on stream, just to share that. Rather than the usual list, because it's getting pretty hefty. If you'd like to see the full list and below A plus tier into A tier, just ask about it in the comments and I'll be happy to drop you a link. But yeah, that's about it, guys. Thank you so much. Sorry for the wait again for this. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing with the Egghead video. We are doing streams every week. We're up to date, so we're doing those. I can't guarantee that there'll be a video review for Egghead, but I think it's probably going to happen. It just will probably take a while. The arc's not even done, and it's a huge arc, so I'm going to have to rethink about how I review it if I do review it. Again, not set in stone that I will, but it's likely. If you'd like to ask an AJPiece comment for the hell of it, feel free to do that. If you'd like to follow me on Twitch, where we read every single chapter of One Piece, even now that we've caught up every week, please feel free to do so. You can join the Discord if you'd like to join the community. And that's about it. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and now that I'm caught up, it feels a little bit surreal, but I think this is a new chapter on my adventure, and I just appreciate you guys being along for it. Many thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.